After living as a beetle for so long, Gregor Samsa could not recall the sound of a violin playing. However, this evening he began to hear it from the kitchen. The three boarders that now lived with his family had finished their dinner and were now relaxing together in the living room with their heads bent over their smartphones and Blackberries. They sat quietly, writing emails and checking their messages until they, too, heard Greta playing her violin. Upon hearing the music, they put away their phones and tiptoed lightly over to the kitchen door.
If our daughter's violin practice is disturbing you, I would certainly ask her to stop,
Called out Gregor's father, noticing the shuffling.
Oh, not at all.
Replied the second man.
In fact, it's larger and cozier in this room. If she doesn't mind, she could come in and play for us here.
Of course, we would love to.
Gregor's father said eagerly as if he were the violin player himself. With this, the three men sat back in the living room and waited for Greta to arrive. Soon, Gregor's father appeared with the music stand, his wife with sheet music, and Greta with her violin, calmly preparing herself for the performance. Her fathers had never had boarders before, and therefore were overly courteous towards the three men. They did not dare to sit down in their own chairs. Mr. Samsa, still in his work uniform from earlier that day, leaned against the door. Mrs. Samsa, however, sat in a chair in the corner after offered a seat by one of the boarders. As Greta began her music, her parents paid close attention, one on either side, to the graceful movements of her hands. Drawn in by the music, Gregor had boldly crawled far enough out of his room so that his head was sticking into the living room in order to watch everyone sitting together and relaxing. He was getting used to his family's constant working. Greta recently earned a job at the Starbucks not far away. His father started working for a nearby bank, his first job since the banking crisis, and his mother at a local grocery store. Previously, he had been very proud of himself for being considerate and careful to hide himself from view, but now, it didn't even cross his mind that he might catch someone's eye. To make matters worse, he was now so covered in dust from his room that it fluttered with even the slightest movement, all the more reason to stay hidden. He was covered in threads, hairs, and scraps of food, and now he was too indifferent to attempt to clean himself on the carpet like he had used to several times a day. Luckily, Gregor remained unnoticed. His family was immersed in Greta's violin playing. At first, the three boarders crowded around her to observe her movements and read the sheet music, making her anxious. However, they soon moved away and spoke to each other quietly, as Gregor's father watched them nervously. It was now obvious that they were expecting overly profound pieces of classical music, but had instead been given covers of various pop songs, clearly disappointed. All three have had enough of Greta's performance and now stayed quiet solely out of politeness, although frequently checking their phones from their pockets. Yet Greta's playing was indeed beautiful. Her face was slightly leaning to one side, eyes carefully following the notes printed on the sheets with a focused expression. Gregor crawled further yet again, being sure to keep his head close to the floor just in case he could meet her eyes if given the opportunity. Surely he was still human if he felt love for music. He felt as if he were being given the nourishment he had been searching for in his new life. He was determined to crawl up to his sister and tug at her skirt to get her attention, to tell her she should come into his room with her violin instead, since nobody would ever appreciate her music as much as he would. He could listen to her play her violin forever, and with his new horror-like appearance would scare anyone away if they tried to take him from her. But of course, his sister wouldn't be forced to stay in his room. She would stay by her own will, sitting next to her poor brother on the sofa. He longed to tell her that he always wished to send her to the Juilliard school, and how he had planned on announcing it last Christmas.
Has Christmas really come and gone so quickly?
He thought to himself sadly.
If this whole situation hadn't happened, I would have never let anyone keep me from sending my beloved Greta to school.
He thought about telling her his old plans now, as a bug. He imagined her bursting into tears, overwhelmed by her love for her brother and pity for his current state. He would climb up to her shoulder and give her a hug and kiss so that she knew her brother still loved her.
Mr. Samsa!
Shouted one of the boarders, pale-faced in horror, pointing a trembling finger at Gregor. The music quickly ceased. Dumbfounded, the boarders looked back and forth from each other to Gregor, but their amazement soon turned into amusement. Gregor's father tried to reassure the men, but they were unalarmed. In fact, they found Gregor's presence more entertaining than the violin playing. Nonetheless, Gregor's father rushed them back towards their room while trying to hide Gregor from their view. However, the men now became annoyed. partly because of Mr. Sampson's behavior, and partly because of the realization that Gregor had been living with them all this time. The men demanded explanations, but eventually retreated back into their rooms reluctantly. Meanwhile, Greta had overcome the despair she had fallen into when Gregor interrupted her performance. She had let her hands go limp and loosely held her violin and bow for a while longer, eyes following the music as if she had still been playing. But then she pulled herself together, put her instrument down, and ran into the next room. Mrs. Sampson had not moved from her seat, struggling for breath and trying her best to recover from what just happened. Distracted by everything happening so quickly, Gregor's father forgot the respect and apologies he owed to the boarders. He quickly went to their room and upon arrival was bombarded with questions. One man raised his hand, getting the attention of Gregor's mother and sister as well, and shouted,
Do you think this is acceptable? The conditions of this place are disgusting. I'm sorry, but I can no longer stay in this room. For the days I have been living here, I will, of course, pay no rent at all. In fact, I will consider whether or not I want to press charges for the poor service and dangerous conditions from you. And trust me, I know a lot of powerful people in this city. It would be not difficult to do.
After a short silence, he looked straight ahead and waited for a reaction. The two other boarders quickly joined in and agreed with the first boarder. And with that, he took hold of the door handle and slammed the door shut.